You mentioned Lehman Brothers, Matt. Brian, you write with Paul in Change Haiti Can Believe in your op-ed piece. We also need to invest in democracy. 3 days spending in Iraq or 2 weeks interest on the bank bailout could fund Haiti's entire government for a year. What would a Marshall Plan look like?
Well, I think before we get to the economics, the first thing that we need to do is to make it clear that we're going to respect the Haitian government. And I think as part of that, the second thing is that we would need to go along with their priorities. And as Linda mentioned, there's the PRSP, which is the Poverty Reduction Strategy paper that the Haitian government has put out. And certainly that the plan would be to finance that according to the priorities set by the elected Haitian government. And I think, but beyond that, I think we do need to be generous relative to Haiti, but it's not relative to anything else. You know, as you mentioned, it's a tiny percentage of either the war or the bailout package. And Haiti's a place where we can make a very little bit of honest U.S. help can make a huge difference because it's a relatively small economy. There's a lot of people, but it's a small economy. It's close. There's things that we've done that have worked, and again, in the medical field, Paul's demonstrated it. We demonstrated in the legal field. There's lots of good projects that have worked in Haiti, and I think we need to revive the programs that have worked, build the Haitian government's capacity to run their own programs, which is in the end the solution. One of the things that the previous economic development and humanitarian aid has done is to treat only the symptoms and not deal with the root causes. And certainly if people are starving, you've got to figure out a way of getting some food. But there's going to be a crisis tomorrow in Haiti, and there's going to be a crisis the next day, and people are going to be hungry again unless the root causes are addressed. And so you need to address the root causes. One of them is that the government doesn't have capacity, so any U.S. aid needs to develop Haiti's own capacity. The other is you have to treat the problem of inequality. One of the things, everybody's shocked when they get to Haiti and you see Cité Soleil and other poor areas. It's obviously very shocking. And I don't know, if you went up to Pétionville, but you go up to Pétionville and you see houses that are huge by the standards of anywhere in the United States. And if you drive around Haiti, there's people driving around in SUVs with chauffeurs, and then everybody else is walking or on tap-taps. And you just get this huge gulf where you've got some of the richest people in the world and some of the poorest people in the world. And that's one of the things that we need to do is to help the government close that equality gap.
Brian, this is a question from the audience. Please put Haiti in the larger context of Latin American politics, especially given the wave of countries who've elected governments on their own terms, like Venezuela, Paraguay, Uruguay, etc.
That's a really good question, and it's a question that fortunately the answer is changing for the better. I think that one of the reasons why, people always ask me, every time I speak, someone says, why Haiti? Why are we doing this? And one of the answers that I gave was, it was kind of like this domino theory, that if Haiti was allowed to become a progressive, popularly elected democracy, then other countries would start wanting that as well. And I think that does explain why we invest a huge amount of money in keeping Haiti down. Fortunately, that cat is out of the bag. I think that you have progressive elected democracies elsewhere in Latin America, especially Venezuela and in South America. And Venezuela has the money and is able to support other countries, including Haiti, that are going along that path. And so, in a sense, it's actually almost impossible to kind of go back to our pre-2002 policies, because in fact, it has been demonstrated, not by Haiti, but by other countries, that progressive democracy can bring dividends to the people. And so that's only going to help Haiti. It's going to make it harder for the U.S. It's going to give the U.S. less incentive to keep Haiti down. And Venezuela has been very generous in its support to Haiti in terms of giving it discounted fuel, in terms of giving support for other bottom-up development efforts.
This is a question from Denise. Given Aristide's exile in South Africa, he is the political face of the Haitian people. What are the chances he'll be permitted to return to govern Haiti and organize a government? And secondly, where did you get the land to build your clinics, hospitals, schools? Paul.
Oh, that's for me. Well,
I'll take that one.
Yeah, get that. The first question, I have no idea, whether the chances, as I've said before, the chances are generated not just in Haiti, but here in Haiti. So part of that's going to have to do with local, considerations in Haiti and others, transnational considerations here. And then I don't know if that's what what Aristide wants. I don't know the answer to these things. Maybe Brian will.
Just a little background. When Aristide was forced out, when he came back to the Western Hemisphere, I think it was Rice and Powell who were threatening, saying he was not to return to this hemisphere. Randall Robinson responded, "Whose hemisphere?" And the ambassador said not to come within 150 miles of Haiti, and he said, whose country? But he ended up going to Jamaica to pick up his girls, and then they went to South Africa. He's since gotten yet another degree in South Africa.
He's gotten a degree in African languages, a doctoral degree. And that's, with those strange clicks in the language. Now, when I say I don't know what he wants, I know he wants to return to his home like his children and wife do. But I don't know the answer to that question about as a political leader. I can certainly say how I'd feel about returning as a political leader after being overthrown twice by military coups, but that's me. And I'd like to hear what Brian has to say about that. Now, that's a great question about where we get our land for the hospitals, and it goes back to Linda's point, the point that all of us have underlined. Back in the 80s, and I think we could justify this, I'm looking at some of my colleagues, we didn't really want to work with the Duvalier dictatorship, call us old-fashioned. And so we were working mostly with church groups and local community organizations. And so the place where the big hospital that John mentioned is built on church property. But about 10 years ago, we started doing what I think is a good exercise for NGOs. This is Partners in Health and our local sister organizations, Amina Santé. And saying, okay, well, we're taking care of poor people who are sick, and that's good, and we're getting a lot of kids into school, and that's good. But what are we doing wrong? What could we do better? And we had tried to work with the government, the first elected government in 1991, but it was overthrown after about 7 months. It was a very, very difficult and really deadly time. And then when the constitutionally elected government was returned, we started trying to work with them again. But finally, in 2000, we said we were very optimistic. And, a lot of us are still optimistic in spite of all the bad things that have happened. We said we need to build a new kind of NGO because there's so many NGOs and church groups. I've been to a state in southern United States, I won't mention which one, but they have two Catholic dioceses. And it's close to Washington, and it's southern. It's not. And they have a Democratic senator they just elected, and they went Obama. Anyway.
Barely.
And my mother is named after that state, maybe. But anyway, so they have two dioceses. And in those two dioceses, in one of them, Catholic diocese, there are 80 parish twinning projects with parishes, churches in Haiti, just in that one part of central Haiti. So you want to go and say, hey, couldn't we be greater than the sum of our parts? So what we tried to do 10 years ago, back to your point about land, is to say we're only going to expand in the public sector. We're an NGO. We're affiliated with a small community-based college here in Cambridge, Massachusetts, that you dropped out of, and with a lot of church groups and community groups, but we're only going to expand in the public sector. So when towns would come to us and say, we want Partners in Health to build a hospital for us, we'll give you the land, we'd say, no, give the land to the Ministry of Health and ask them to mandate that we come in and build infrastructure here and help work with you. And that's been our MO. And that's why I'm going back tomorrow. And so that's why we've been in and out of Haiti so much with our colleagues, is we're trying to continue that model of rebuilding public infrastructure, taking care of sick people and preventing illness, but also training lots of people. And so the land is owned by the people of Haiti, by the Republic of Haiti, and we believe that's how you talk about sustainability. It'll be sustained because it's owned lock, stock, and barrel, every bit of it, by the Haitian government.
Brian.